The morning mist hugged the earth like a lover unwilling to let go, and the rooster's cry echoed through the clay-roofed village of Ajaka. Adewunmi stepped barefoot into the dewy fields, her wrapper tied loosely around her waist as she carried a shallow calabash. The scent of wet soil and hibiscus followed her as she walked toward the stream, unaware that this would be the last day her life would be her own. She was known not just for her beauty but for her kindness. When elders needed water, she fetched it. When children wept, she sang. But this morning, something felt different. The wind carried a strange whistle, neither songbird nor beast, just a whisper, as if someone was calling her name from beyond the veil of this world. As she knelt by the stream, a cold shiver ran down her spine. She turned, and for a brief moment swore she saw a shadowy figure vanish into the forest line. She whispered a quiet prayer to the Orisha Osun, guardian of the river, and dipped her calabash. The wind whispered again. This time, it was clearer. Bride. Inside the palace walls of Oyo, the Oba's court was in session. Beaded crowns shimmered under the morning sun as tribal elders, advisors, and the high priest of Ifa gathered around the king. A message had come from the oracle in a dream, a vision of a girl with palm wine eyes, chosen by the gods to bring balance to the royal line. The oracle, Baba Oyin, stood tall and trembling. He spoke in parables, as was his way. The river will meet the crown, he declared, but only if the fire of love is not lit first. A path has been chosen. Interference shall bring destruction. The king, puzzled but obedient to divine will, ordered a search across the provinces to find the girl from the vision. 3 days later, a royal envoy returned with news of a girl in Ajaka whose beauty matched the prophecy. Her name was Adewunmi. In the forest beyond the village, a young hunter stood among the trees, his bare chest painted with charcoal and red ochre. Oba was a master tracker, a whisperer of animals, and known to be stubborn in the ways of tradition. But in matters of the heart, he bowed only to Adewunmi. They met in secret beneath the Iroko tree where she would bring him palm wine and laughter. They dreamed of escaping to the northern hills, where no kingdom or curse could find them. He promised her a small hut by the river and a garden of okra and yam. She believed him. But even as they kissed in the silence of the woods, the wind carried whispers. Neither of them noticed. The trees were listening, and something deep within the forest stirred. The news of Adewunmi's selection swept through Ajaka like wildfire. Her father, Papa Adebayo, dropped to his knees in gratitude, praising the ancestors for such an honor. Gifts began to pour into their home, beads, silks, perfumes from the coast. But Adewunmi's face remained troubled. Oba confronted her near the stream. "You will not go," he said. "We will run before they arrive." She wanted to believe him. She touched his face and wept, torn between duty and love. But the decision was no longer hers. That night, a royal chariot arrived with trumpets and drums to carry her away to the capital. As she looked back at her village one last time, the whisper came again. This time, it was a warning. Bride of the kingdom, cursed by love. The palace of Oyo was larger than any place Adewunmi had imagined. Gilded halls, painted walls, and servants in rows. But the air was heavy with something unseen. As she entered her new chambers, her footsteps echoed unnaturally. The handmaidens refused to sleep in her room that night, whispering that it once belonged to the late queen who died mysteriously. That evening, the crown prince came to see her. He was polite, handsome, but distant. He offered her coral beads and gold, but not warmth. "You have been chosen," he said flatly. "The gods will bless our union." Adewunmi smiled on the outside, but her heart screamed Oba's name. And that night, the whispers returned. But this time, they weren't just in the wind. They were in her dreams. A woman in white stood at the edge of a river of blood and said, "You wear my crown." The palace was silent at midnight. Only the rustle of palm fronds and the creak of aged floorboards filled the air. Adewunmi awoke to the cold touch of something unseen brushing her ankle. She bolted upright, her breathing shallow. At the foot of her bed was nothing, but the air felt charged, like lightning waiting to strike. She rose and walked slowly to the far wall, where the floor creaked more loudly with each step. Dropping to her knees, she placed her ear to the floor and froze. Below, she heard crying, a woman's sobs, low and mournful, echoing from beneath the earth. Terrified, she fled the room and ran to the corridor, only to find the palace guards missing from their posts. In their place stood a woman in white, her face hidden behind a lace veil. She raised one hand slowly and vanished into smoke. The next morning, Adewunmi asked a handmaiden about the woman in white. The girl's face paled and she dropped her clay pot. "Do not speak of her," she whispered, "or she will visit again." But Adewunmi needed answers. She made her way to the palace library, an ancient hall lined with scrolls and forbidden books, guarded by silence and dust. There she found a section sealed by chains marked with red symbols. An old scribe watched her approach but said nothing. She slipped through the hanging cloth and unrolled a scroll titled, "The Brides Who Never Wed." Names filled the parchment, dozens of them, all young women, all marked with the same death year. At the bottom of the scroll was a smear of ink and a fresh name being written by an unseen hand, Adewunmi. Far beyond the palace, Oba had not given up. For days he wandered the forest in search of the old priestess rumoured to speak with spirits. He hunted with no rest, slept under baobab trees, and offered gifts to the forest shrines. The animals, once his companions, now watched him with cold, unreadable eyes. He finally found her in a cave carved into a cliff, the priestess of ashes. Blind, wrapped in tattered cloth, she sat beside a fire that burned without wood. "You seek the stolen bride," she croaked, "but love has no power in a house already cursed." Oba begged for help. She pointed to the fire and said, "Look into the flame." But no, what you see cannot be undone. Within the fire, Oba saw Adewunmi in chains, surrounded by shadows. One spirit turned toward him and smiled with his mother's face. Back in Oyo, preparations for the wedding continued, but strange omens plagued the city. Chickens laid black eggs, the palace well turned bitter, and the moon, on the 7th night, rose blood-red in the sky. The people whispered, "Ajay is watching." That evening the oracle was summoned. Baba Oyin collapsed after his vision. When he awoke, he screamed, "Do not let her wear the veil. The veil carries death." But the royal guards dismissed him, claiming age had made his mind fragile. Adewunmi stood before the ceremonial mirror, dressed in coral beads and ivory silk. As the veil was placed over her head, her reflection shifted. For a fleeting moment, her eyes turned jet black, and she smiled with someone else's mouth. The palace drums thundered. The wedding had begun. Guests filled the grand courtyard with music, palm wine, and ritual chants. The prince stood at the altar, dressed in gold-embroidered agbada, waiting to claim his bride. But as Adewunmi stepped forward, the wind rose suddenly, howling through the walls. The flames in the ceremonial pots blew out. A deafening silence fell. The priest raised the binding staff, and suddenly the sky split with lightning. A scream pierced the air, not from a guest, but from beneath the ground. A crack opened in the marble floor beneath Adewunmi's feet. A hand, pale and clawed, reached out and touched her ankle. She collapsed, her eyes wide open, unmoving. The bride was not breathing. The cursed bride had awakened. Adewunmi's body lay still on the cold palace floor, but her chest rose and fell. She was not dead, but she would not speak. Her eyes stared blankly at the sky, and no amount of calling her name could rouse her. The court priest declared it a trance. The older women whispered, "She has been taken to the other side." The prince demanded answers, but the oracle had vanished. Fear gripped the royal family. Guests fled the palace. Servants refused to enter her chamber. She was carried to her room, where a dozen spiritualists performed rites, chanting into the early morning. But Adewunmi did not blink. As the last candle burned out, her lips moved. Just 3 words. He is coming. No one knew who he was, but the temperature in the room dropped, as if the air itself was afraid. Oba raced toward Oyo with a growing storm behind him. He had learned from the priestess that the bond of love could break the grip of the spirit world, but only with sacrifice. He had only one chance: reach Adewunmi before the spirits took full possession. As he entered the sacred forest paths, the trees closed around him. The forest was alive, branches curled like fingers, roots twisted to trip him, and shadows moved without light. Still he pressed on, calling her name into the trees, hoping her spirit would hear him. That night, he slept by a cursed stream. In his dreams, he saw her. She was wrapped in vines, eyes closed, floating between this world and the next. She whispered, "I'm losing myself." When he awoke, there were vines around his ankles. In the palace, the oracle finally returned. His robes were torn, his eyes hollow. He approached the king's chamber and threw down burning cowries, crying out, "The spirit's name must be known, or she will never be free." The flames turned blue and a name appeared in the smoke: Ayalode Age. Gasps rippled through the court. Ayalode Age was a once powerful priestess who had been banished centuries ago after seducing the Oba's ancestor. Betrayed, she died, cursing the royal bloodline. Now she had returned, using Adewunmi as her vessel. The oracle warned, if her name is spoken at the river's mouth, she will rise fully. But if love finds her first, her grip will break. The clock had begun to tick. Love or curse, only one would reach Adewunmi first. That night, thunder cracked the sky as a dark mist poured into Adewunmi's room. Her body arched off the bed, eyes glowing with silver light. The voice that came from her lips was not her own. It was older, deeper. "I am the forgotten bride. I was thrown away. Now I wear the crown." The walls bled black liquid. Her hair lifted as if underwater. The maidservants ran, screaming, but just before the guards burst in, she collapsed back to the bed. The mist disappeared. The curse was now alive and growing. The king ordered the palace sealed. "No one enters, no one leaves," he commanded. But even he could not stop what had already begun. That night, 4 guards died in their sleep, their eyes wide open and mouths filled with river water. Oba finally reached the outskirts of Oyo and headed straight for the river Ogun, the mouth of all ancient spirits. He knew the ritual. To break a curse, he must speak the spirit's name into the river while bleeding from his heart. It was said only true sacrifice could stir the gods. He sliced his chest and cried, "Iyalode Age, I know your name, but she is not your bride." His blood fell into the water, which turned black for a moment, then cleared. For a second he heard her laughter, then silence. Behind him the wind picked up. From the trees came dozens of eyes, white, blinking spirit eyes. Oba dropped to his knees. "Take me, not her," he pleaded. But the wind only whispered back, "You are already hers." The river's silence haunted Oba. He wandered upstream, following the path of the ancestors, until he came upon a place where the earth had split open long ago. Bones protruded from the soil like twisted roots. The air here was cold, unnaturally so, and a foul odor of forgotten things clung to the wind. He had reached the burial ground of the cast-out priestesses. No one dared to speak of it. According to the stories, Iyalode Age was buried there in secret by jealous wives of the palace who feared her power. They stoned her, burned her relics, and buried her in an unmarked grave. As Oba walked between the broken gravestones, he felt a pull, a humming vibration beneath the earth. One grave was covered in thorns. He knelt before it and whispered, "I know you were betrayed." But so was she. Behind him, the shadows began to move. Back at the palace, Adewunmi had stopped eating. She spoke only at night, when the shadows were longest. Her handmaidens left offerings of food and kola nuts, but none dared enter her chamber any more. She sat in silence, staring at an unlit candle that had never burned. One night, a young servant named Tani disobeyed orders and entered the room. She found Adewunmi humming a song no one had taught her. The bride turned and smiled, not cruelly, but with a sadness that made Tani weep. "Light the candle," she whispered. Tani obeyed. As the wick caught flame, silver chains began to appear on Adewunmi's wrists and ankles, visible only in the candlelight. "I'm not free," she said, "because she is still chained." Tani ran from the room, but her dreams that night were filled with drums and fire. The crown prince, once proud and cold, began to crack. He hadn't slept in days. He heard whispers from the water jars and saw the face of Adewunmi in every mirror, even when she wasn't near. Worse, every time he approached her chamber, his nose bled and his knees weakened. The palace priests suggested another cleansing. He refused. "I am not cursed," he roared. But that night, he awoke to find his bed soaked, not with sweat, but with red palm oil. At the center of the bed sat a single white feather, trembling without wind. He staggered through the halls toward the oracle, screaming for help. But as he passed a mirror, he saw his reflection lag behind him, then smile with a woman's face. He collapsed in terror, and the guards found him whispering, "She knows I never loved her." What had once been a palace rumor was now undeniable. Servants began falling ill. Palace animals refused to enter certain rooms. The fountain in the east courtyard turned green, then black. The town criers, once silenced by order, began to murmur the old name, Ajay. Markets grew quiet. Weddings across the kingdom were postponed. No one wanted to invoke the wrath of the spirit by celebrating love. At the city gates, travelers began to turn away, frightened by tales of a bride whose soul had been stolen by the past. Within the palace, Adewunmi stood at her window, her white veil floating though there was no wind. Below, people stared up at her in awe and terror. Her mouth did not move, but all of Oyo heard her voice. "You cursed me first." In the shadow of the rising chaos, a forgotten figure returned to the palace, a young palace drummer named Alake, whose great-grandmother had served under Iyalode Ajay. He came not with fear, but with music. He claimed to have dreamt of the spirit for years. Alake requested permission to perform a sacred drum ritual, the bata, used to awaken old gods and soothe angry ancestors. The king, desperate, allowed it. That night, as the moon rose full and red, Alake sat before the palace gates and beat the drum of forgiveness. As the rhythm echoed through the night, Adewunmi stirred. Her body swayed in her sleep, and she began to hum again. This time, the tune matched the drumbeat. Somewhere, deep in the palace walls, a locked door creaked open for the first time in 200 years. The creaking door Alake's drumming awakened was not part of any known map of the palace. It lay hidden behind a shrine in the Queen Mother's old quarters. The guards found it after a sudden gust of cold air shattered her ancestral mirror. Beyond the stone door lay a spiral staircase descending into darkness. The walls were carved with ancient glyphs and fading prayers. At the bottom, they discovered a forgotten chamber filled with broken pottery, bones, and a bridal crown buried in ash. At the center of the room stood a mirror framed in black wood. It did not reflect the room. It reflected another place. A riverbank beneath the moon, and in it, a bride stood weeping. When the guards turned to flee, one of them vanished without a sound. The prince could no longer bear the pressure. He requested a private meeting with the king and confessed everything, how he never wanted to marry Adewunmi, how he had loved another woman secretly, and how he'd prayed the oracle would choose someone else. The king was silent, but the oracle spoke with thunder in his voice. "You desecrated the divine choice. You scorned the sacred bond. You invited the spirit's wrath." The prince wept, admitting that the first time he saw Adewunmi he was angry, not in love. The oracle revealed a cruel truth. Adewunmi had not been cursed randomly. The curse followed the path of betrayal. Every time a bride was chosen for power, not love, Iyalode Aje drew closer, and now she had nearly taken Adewunmi completely. Oba finally reached the gates of Oyo. His body was worn, clothes torn, but his spirit unbroken. The guards refused to let him in. "The kingdom is sealed," they said. "No strangers." But Oba was not a stranger to the heart that called him. He fell to his knees and began to chant her name, not loudly, but with a tenderness. "Adewunmi, my light, my river flower." His voice reached her chamber, carried by wind and spirit. Her eyes opened for the first time in days. Inside the palace, candles blew out all at once. She sat up. For the first time, she whispered his name back. "Oba." The guards at the gate turned. The doors unlocked themselves. The city had made its choice. As Oba was escorted into the palace, Adewunmi began to transform. Her voice layered, hers, and another's beneath. Her skin glowed, but her shadow moved separately. In the mirror, she was no longer alone. Iyalode Aje stood beside her reflection. "You call him," the spirit growled, "but he failed to call me. You love a man who does not see the pain of women." Adewunmi shook her head. "He sees me, and I see you. You were wronged, but I will not carry your revenge." Their bodies began to separate, spirit from soul. But the price was steep. To fully break the bond, Adewunmi would have to willingly step into the spirit realm and release Iyalode Aje with forgiveness. The oracle prepared a sacred circle in the palace courtyard. Elders and priests formed a ring, each holding a gourd of salt water and a feather of peace. In the center stood Adewunmi and Oba, hand in hand. The air buzzed with ancestral power. Baba Oyin chanted the invocation, "Let spirit meet soul. Let truth meet pain. Let love meet justice." The sky darkened. Thunder roared. A swirling portal of wind and ash opened behind Adewunmi, and the voice of Iyalode Aje rang out, "Enter, if you dare!" Oba tried to hold her back, but Adewunmi kissed his hand. "If I do not face her, she will never rest, and neither will I." She stepped into the vortex alone. The last thing she heard was Oba's voice saying, "I will wait at the river." Adewunmi found herself in a place where light shimmered like water and the sky flowed like a river. It was neither earth nor afterlife, but the realm between, a forgotten crossing where unhealed spirits lingered. She walked barefoot across a bridge made of mist, toward a distant drumbeat. On either side of her, ghostly figures whispered. They were brides, some crying, others silent. Each had once been chosen for political gain, not love. Each bore the mark of Iyalode Aje. The bridge ended at a shore covered in salt and ash. There, beneath a twisted baobab tree, sat the spirit of Iyalode Aje, draped in crimson and silver, her face hidden behind a veil of bones. "So," the spirit hissed, "the chosen bride dares enter." Adewunmi stood tall, despite the trembling in her hands. "You were wronged, but why punish women like you? Why turn us into weapons for revenge?" Iyalode Aje rose slowly, her form towering and ancient. "Because you forgot. Because your kings forgot. I was the first bride of Oyo, given to a man to seal a war, used, discarded, buried in silence. Now, I speak with the mouths of the voiceless." Adewunmi did not argue. Instead, she knelt. "Then let me be your voice, but not your weapon." Her words struck the spirit like thunder. The ghost brides behind her stirred, and the sky above shifted. Something ancient in the air had begun to listen. Back in the realm of the living, Oba could feel her fading. He refused to stay still. Against all warnings, he entered the sacred circle alone and began a ritual never intended for outsiders. The lover's summons. He beat the talking drum with trembling hands, singing her name between each strike. The oracle tried to stop him, but the drum responded, not to tradition, but to truth. A wind spun around him, lifting the feathers from the priest's hands. Suddenly, his voice echoed into the realm between worlds. Adewunmi turned toward the sound, and even Iyalode Aje paused. "That song," she whispered. "No prince has ever sung like that." The veil dropped. Iyalode Aje's face was young, no older than Adewunmi's. Her eyes, once filled with vengeance, now wept freely. "Do you wish to see what I was?" she asked. Adewunmi nodded. In a shimmer of smoke, the world changed. They stood in ancient Oyo when the kingdom was still a handful of huts. Aje was being led to a warrior chief twice her age. Her eyes were full of fear. There was no ceremony, no joy, just silence. When he died in battle, she was blamed, branded a cursed wife, banished. She died alone in the forest, clutching her unborn child. "And so," she said, "I cursed the bridal crown, so none would wear it without knowing my sorrow." Moved to tears, Adewunmi reached out and took Iyalode Aje's hand. "Let me wear the crown and remember your pain, but let me also live, not in fear, but in love." Iyalode Aje trembled. No one had offered love in centuries, only sacrifices or fear. The mist shifted. The ghost brides began to smile. Their chains faded. Aje's spirit began to glow softly like the dawn breaking through smoke. "I release you," the spirit whispered, "but only if he enters with you. Only if the crown is worn by choice." The sky split above the palace. A second vortex opened, one for Oba. He heard her voice call, "Come, let us be free together." Oba stepped through the vortex, drawn by Adewunmi's voice like a compass. He arrived barefoot in the spirit realm, where the sky shimmered with ancestral light and the earth pulsed with memory. Waiting for him was a ceremonial altar formed from silver roots and ancestral bones. The spirit of Iyalode Aje, now softened and radiant, stood between him and Adewunmi. "If you wish to join her," she said, "you must wed her in both worlds, bound by spirit, not politics." Oba nodded without hesitation. "Then let it be done." Aje raised her arms. The ghost brides, now free, encircled them, humming a haunting melody. A drum sounded in the distance, steady, sacred, and final. Before vows could be spoken, a fire rose between them. "Step through it," Iyalode Aje said. "Together, for only truth survives the fire." It was no ordinary flame. It danced with voices, memories, and long-lost intentions. Oba and Adewunmi held hands and stepped into the blaze. Instantly, they were surrounded by visions. Oba saw his father's broken promises. Adewunmi saw her mother's silent suffering. Both were tempted to turn back, but they didn't. When they emerged, the flames were gone. Their eyes were wet, but clear. The past had not vanished, but it had been acknowledged. Iyalode Aje bowed her head. "Then, your union is truth." Iyalode Aje reached into her chest and pulled out a radiant bridal crown. Not gold, but silver and bone, wrapped in ancient red thread. "This is the true crown of Oyo," she said. "Not one forged in vanity, but in memory." She placed it on Adewunmi's head. The moment it touched her, echoes of every bride in Oyo's history sang through the realm. Joy, pain, hope, silence. Then came a hush, and then a roar. Thousands of voices lifted together in blessing. Oba knelt and kissed her hand. "My queen," he whispered. Not out of tradition, but reverence. The spirit realm shook, and Iyalode Aje began to dissolve into light. The portal to the living world reopened, but now it glowed gold instead of blue. Oba and Adewunmi stepped through together, landing softly in the palace courtyard. It was dawn, and the first light of day crowned the sky like an omen. The oracle, stunned to silence, fell to her knees. "It is done," she whispered. "The curse has been lifted, not broken by power, but healed by love." The palace guards, villagers, and even the king himself emerged to see the couple alive and glowing. Oba helped Adewunmi up the palace steps, not as a prize, but as a partner. The women of the village wept. For once, a bride had not been sacrificed. She had returned, crowned, chosen, and whole. Now Queen of Oyo in both realms, Adewunmi gave her first decree. "From this day," she said, "no woman shall be traded for land, peace, or favor. The bridal crown will be worn by love, not strategy." Her words echoed across the land. Some elders grumbled, but the people cheered. Ayalode Aj's voice was no longer in the shadows. It lived in the law, in the vow, in the heart of the new queen. Oba stood beside her, proud and silent, not leading, but supporting. Adewunmi, the cursed bride who had defied death and spirits, was now the voice of every bride before her and everyone to come. The joy in Oyo was great, but joy never lasts unchallenged. Beneath the surface, whispers crept like vines. Some elders said the spirits had tricked them, that no mortal bride should return from the other side with power. Chief Olumide, one of the king's most trusted advisers, met with others in secret. "She threatens the order of our fathers," he hissed. "What comes next? A queen with an army? A woman who crowns herself?" They plotted softly, hiding behind tradition and pride. What they couldn't control, they would try to crush. And they weren't alone. In the dark corridors of the palace, shadows stirred once again. One morning, a group of elders approached the throne with a scroll sealed in red wax. An ancient blood petition. It called for Queen Adewunmi to step down from spiritual matters and return to ceremonial duties only. Oba stood to speak, but Adewunmi raised her hand. "Let them speak," she said, her voice calm. She read the scroll aloud for all to hear. It accused her of witchcraft, false visions, and dangerous reforms, but when she finished, she folded the scroll gently and said, "I am not the danger. Silence is. The blood on your hands came from brides you buried, not the crown I wear." The silence that followed was deafening. That night, the oracle came to Adewunmi in private. Her face was troubled, her eyes tired. "The spirit realm is at peace," she said, "but the living will not rest. Power unbalanced awakens hunger, even among those closest to you." Adewunmi frowned. "Do you mean Oba?" "No," said the oracle, "but he must choose his loyalty now. Not to you, but to your vision. That's where your enemies will strike." Outside, the wind howled like an omen. Inside, Adewunmi lit a single oil lamp. "Then let them come," she whispered. "Let them test the fire I walked through." During a feast to celebrate the village's first harvest under Adewunmi's rule, a servant brought her a goblet of wine. She lifted it, but just as it neared her lips, the bridal crown began to glow red-hot on her head. Adewunmi froze. Something was wrong. She placed the cup on the table, nodding to Oba. He handed the goblet to the palace dog, who sniffed it and dropped dead within seconds. Gasps filled the hall. Guards rushed in. But Adewunmi didn't scream. She stood and raised her voice. Even poisoned wine cannot stop a bride who walked through fire. The next morning, a new rumor spread like wildfire. Oba had ordered the wine. Someone had forged his seal on the goblet's approval scroll. The elders saw their chance. "Let the queen choose," they said, "justice or loyalty." Adewunmi was torn. She knew Oba's heart, but the law demanded action. She summoned him before the palace and asked, "Did you send the wine?" Oba looked her in the eyes and said, "No. But if my blood will stop your enemies, take it." He knelt before her, ready to die. Adewunmi turned to the people. "Then let the spirits decide. Tonight, we walk into judgment." As night fell, the palace courtyard filled with firelight and murmurs. The elders formed a circle around a raised altar, chanting an ancient invocation to the gods of justice and truth. Oba and Adewunmi stood together, hands bound by braided red thread, ready to face whatever spirits would come. The oracle stepped forward, raising a feather dipped in sacred palm oil. By the blood of the ancestors and the power of truth, we call the spirits to witness this trial. The air thickened. A low wind swirled, carrying voices of the past. Suddenly, ghostly forms appeared, ancestors, former kings, brides long forgotten, hovering above the circle. The time for truth was now. The first spirit to speak was the late Oba's father, stern and proud. "Speak truth, son. Did you betray your queen?" Oba's voice was steady. "Number I love her beyond duty or law. I would give my life before hers." The spirits murmured among themselves, weighing his words. Then came the whisper of the wind, the voice of Iyalode Aje herself. "Truth is more than words. It is sacrifice, courage, and honor. Prove you are worthy." Oba bowed deeply. "I am ready to prove it." The flames around them flared as a path opened, leading beyond the mortal realm. Now it was Adewunmi's turn. She stepped forward and faced the spirits with unwavering eyes. "I vow to rule with compassion, to honor the women before me, and to protect the future of Oyo." A breeze lifted her veil, revealing strength etched in every line of her face. The spirits circled closer, searching her heart. Then, in a voice clear as day, Iyalode Aje said, "You carry my pain and my hope. You are ready." The bride raised her head high, the bridal crown gleaming with ancestral light. The spirits began to fade, but the sky cracked open with the dawn of a new day. The curse was lifted, but the past was never forgotten. Queen Adewunmi's first act was to rebuild the city's old traditions, honoring all brides and breaking chains of silence. She called a great council, inviting men and women from every village to reshape the laws of marriage and leadership. Oba stood proudly by her side, no longer just a prince, but a partner. Together, they forged a new era for Oyo, one where love was the crown's true power. Years later, tales of the cursed bride became stories of hope. Mothers sang songs of Adewunmi's courage, and daughters wore small silver crowns in her honor. Every year, on the anniversary of the curse's lifting, the people of Oyo lit fires and danced beneath the stars, celebrating the bride who had dared to love beyond death. And in the palace, the bridal crown rested on a velvet pillow, glowing softly, a reminder that love, forgiveness, and truth would always reign.